All right, that was great. So interesting. Thank you. Our second speaker today, or this afternoon, is Dr. Aaron Hershkowitz. Dr. Hershkowitz is the co-director of the Crotto Squeeze Digitization Project and the Acquisitions Librarian at the Historical Studies Social Science Library of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. He has a PhD in classics from Rutgers, to which he will be adding a master's in information in spring 2026. His paper today is titled Handcut Text Recognition, Squeeze, Scans, and Scene Detection.
Okie doke. Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers for putting together what has been an absolutely fantastic conference. This has been so much fun, and thanks as well to my fellow presenters for thought-provoking, inspiring work that you've been sharing with us. Thanks to Eileen for that lovely introduction, and to all of you for your time and attention here. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is an ongoing collaboration between myself at the Institute for Advanced Study and Professor Nicholas Howe at Smith College to apply computer vision techniques to a large corpus of scans of epigraphic squeezes. And although most of you are probably familiar with epigraphy as a concept, let me see whether I can move this to give us a little more space and maybe it'll go away. Beautiful. Although many of you are probably familiar with epigraphy as a concept and studying inscribed texts, less of you may be familiar with squeezes, or at least squeezing in an epigraphic context. So a squeeze is basically a paper negative or impression, can be of any textured surface, but in this context, we're talking about a squeeze being an impression of an inscription, a text carved into some other material, whether it's stone or metal or what have you. And you make a squeeze by taking a special kind of paper that's either called squeeze paper, somewhat straightforwardly, or sometimes chemist's filter paper, which is distinguished by having a very high wet strength. So it's very unlike, tissues or toilet paper. You get those wet, they come apart in your hands. Squeeze paper, you get it wet, it stays very much of a piece. And it's also very low acid. And this allows it to you can make it wet, and then as you see in the image here, you can apply it to the surface that you want to squeeze, and then use a brush to push the paper into all of the cracks and crevices on that surface. And when it dries and you peel it off, it preserves that impression, that negative of the surface in question. So, I pressed a button, so of course. There we go. This is an example of a fragment or two fragments that have been glued together from the Agora excavation in Athens, and a squeeze made of that fragment that now lives at the Institute for Advanced Study just down the road in Princeton. And this connection between the Agora and the Institute is actually really important because it explains why this small research institution in Princeton has the largest collection of epigraphic squeezes in North America. So there was one of the earliest professors of humanistic studies, as they call it at that point, at the Institute, was a man named Benjamin Dean Merritt. And Merritt, who was hired on in 1935, was responsible for publishing all of the inscriptions that were being excavated from the Agora by the American School of Classical Studies. That dig had started just a few years earlier than that. Well, in 1935, you could not simply drive over to Newark and hop on a plane and be in downtown Athens in about 11 hours. It took several weeks on a variety of boats and trains, basically trains, planes, and automobiles, to get over there. And on top of that, it did not take a genius to look around in 1935 and realize that Europe might be a little bit difficult to interact with in the coming years. As a result, to be able to continue to publish and work with these inscriptions that were all in Athens while he was living and working in Princeton, Merritt convinced the Institute for Advanced Study to give him the funds to create a collection of squeezes, not only of the inscriptions that had been dug at the Agora, but also because so much of epigraphy, as we've seen with so many of the philological techniques here, has to do with comparison, with seeing like and understanding that that could be used to fill in like, or understand like. So he not only made squeezes of the inscriptions from the Agora, but of everything that was in the Epigraphic Museum, of the things that were on the Acropolis, and of things at the Sanctuary at Eleusis and at local Deme museums and archaeological sites, etc., and even got donations from other American and British and Greek archaeologists of squeezes that they had made so that they would be centralized and held in one place for future use. So as a result, the Institute ended up with a collection of over 30,000 of these epigraphic squeezes. And it should be noted that we do have more than one squeeze for a single inscription on a number of cases. So we're probably representing more like 15 to 20,000 unique inscriptions with our 34,000 some odd squeezes. And these squeezes are mostly Greek focused, covering kind of the geography of the ancient Greek oikoumene, and also covering the time period, mostly from, we'll say, 500 BCE to 500 CE, with some outliers, especially on the recent side for the Agora materials. So we have some Arabic squeezes from the Ottoman occupation subsequent to this classical period. They're mostly Greek language, but we do have some Latin, some bilingual, some Phoenician, as I mentioned, some Arabic stuff. Okay, so some of you may be wondering, why do something like computer vision, like handwritten text recognition on a squeeze, which is obviously derivative, it's a derivation of the object itself, instead of on the original objects, the inscriptions? And the answer for this is that, as all of us have kind of heard repeatedly over the last day and a half, and as many of us know, when you're working with AI modeling or machine learning modeling, data set size is hugely important. Right? The more data that you have, the better model that you can generate from it. And when you have small data sets, you're constrained in what you can do. So it is very difficult to consistently and in a high quality manner image stone inscriptions. Right? This is an image that you see on the screen here of me at the Epigraphic Museum in Athens. And it's a good reminder that not only are inscriptions, even when they're fragmentary, generally attached to 20+ pound pieces of marble, but they are not infrequently immured in concrete or attached to the floor in museum settings. So you can't just pick them up and take them over to a photographic lab and make this beautiful image, right? And that's not to say anything of all of the inscriptions that are still immured in walls or built into churches, etc., where it's 20 feet off the ground and you're not allowed on the premises and your best shot is with a cell phone camera from 25 feet away, right? The nice thing about squeezes is that they are none of those things. They are small. You can fit hundreds of them into a single box. And you don't need to worry about a photography lab because you can use a flatbed scanner for these things. Right? And that's, in fact, what we did when we digitized this collection. This was a project that I led for the last 5-6 years, where basically we have 2D scanned the entire collection using this exact model of flatbed scanner and using it calls it a 3D lighting function, which is basically just low angle raking light. And low angle raking light is really good for picking up perpendicular features, right? If you think about all the places that the light can hit, and it's not so good at picking up parallel features where there's very little for it to hit. And as a result, when we scan everything twice, and we rotate 90 degrees so that you get 2 different light angles. And this is an example of what the output looks like, and is a really good explanation of why we need to do that. If you look at the second line here, you'll see there's a delta, iota, omicron sequence. On the left side, you can barely see the iota. Right? On the right side, it's lit up like a Christmas tree because depending on where the light is coming from, it's either only hitting the very top or bottom or is fully hitting the side of the letter. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a collaborative project. This is our little team. We started this, me and Nick started this project, started thinking about it 4 or 5 years ago now. And about 2.5 years ago, we were fortunate to get an NEH grant to proceed with some of this work before the NEH sort of ceased to exist as a body. And one of the things that we really wanted to do with this was include students in the process. This is kind of one of the kinds of projects that Ray was talking about earlier, right? Where you have a greater funding set and you can go for a longer period of time and you can hire on students. And so we have 4 students from Smith College who have helped us extensively, not only with annotating and creating ground truth, which was a major project. We were able to fully annotate character-wise 327 squeezes to be used both as training and validation and testing material, but also to do research into different options for approaches that could be taken to this computer vision text recognition problem. This is just a little chart that shows you the breakdown of character annotations, and it's to serve as a reminder that not every character shows up an equal number of times. So there are lots of vowels and things like zeta and psi aren't necessarily going to show up very often. So it's just something to keep in mind when we think about why certain squeezes or letters or things like that may not be recognized at the same clip as others. So there were a lot of different potential approaches we could take to this, and to our knowledge, no one had ever tried to do text recognition on squeeze images before, let alone on squeeze images that had been imaged in this precise way, leading to text that looks like this. So as a result, we were basically just trying a bunch of different things to see what would work well, to try to establish any kind of a methodology that would be a good starting point for refinement. And one such example would be a CNN, a convolutional neural network. And the way that these work is you feed small patches of your image to sets of layers of neurons. These are deep learning methods that are based on actual organic material. So they're based on like the optical cortex of living creatures and the way that those function. So you have these layers of neurons, what they're called, that pool and convolute and kind of twist around, and then condense the image that you're finding to try to output something readable, to interpret what it's, quote, seeing, unquote. And by doing that, learn to identify what content it's looking at. And an important aspect of a CNN is that it is patchwise, right? It's not kind of doing everything all at once. It's going across the image, looking at different pieces here and there to try to create its final understanding of the image. Another approach that we took are search-based methods. So one of these came up earlier. I think in Ray's presentation, there was a brief mention of YOLO, which is one of these scene text detection and recognition engines. We used 2. We looked at YOLO and DBNet, both of which work in a fairly similar way. All of you are somewhat familiar with scene detection, because anytime you've been asked to prove that you're a human by clicking on all of the bicycles in these images, right, you are annotating ground truth for a scene detection engine, for something to be able to look at an image and just parse out what all of the pieces of the image are. So these engines don't make any assumptions about the text structure, and they run over the entire image all at once. So the YOLO actually stands for you only look once, not you only live once, and it expresses this difference between this particular kind of model and the CNN where it's working patchwise. And it generates 2 potential outputs, right? We have this scene text detection and recognition. Detection is to say we've got these boxes, which you can see in the upper right. And so that's just like, where is the text? Where are the characters? Draw me the bounding boxes. The second part is the recognition, and that's harder, right? That is not just draw me the bounding boxes. Don't just say that there's a letter here, but say this is a delta, this is an iota, right? So that's the recognition step, which is a separate and harder step to achieve. Another approach that you can take are sequential methods, where instead of feeding sort of an entire image to the model, you have segmented it in advance. So you've already broken out your lines of text, and then you're feeding them to something like a hidden Markov model or a running output that you use what's called I can't remember what CTC stands for, so you'll have to forgive me. It's worth noting here that I am a historian, a class assistant, a librarian. What I am not is a computer scientist. So I'm doing my best on the technical stuff for this, but if you ask questions that are technical enough, then I'm just going to have to take notes and pass them on to Nicholas. So that's a distinct possibility. So both of these take a line of text, sort of run across it and figure out where there are tokens and where there are blanks, and then you have a methodology at the end, like HMM or CTC, that turns that into an actual transcript, like Decose here. Okay, so the various options that we looked at, we had one where we said, okay, at the end of the day, this is text. Why don't we try the things that exist to do handwritten text recognition? Well, one problem with that is that almost all existing handwritten text recognition operates from the assumption that you've got, let's say, black ink on a white page. And all of us can look, I mean, you can't because of the size necessarily, but we can look at these images on the left, and we as humans can say, oh, sure, I can see letters. I can make them out. What they are not is just black on a white background or white on a black background, right? It's far more complicated than that. So the first step, if you want to use traditional processing, is pre-processing, is taking a variety of steps to try to turn this into what we've called pseudo ink, try to turn this into black on white, and then feed it through Kraken or one of the other, kind of out-of-the-box text recognitions to get your text, right? Another option is to take the underlying capabilities of things like Kraken. So we're using the same technology, but instead of using the out-of-the-box that is trained on black text, white background, we retrain those models using our images. So from the start, they're not looking for black text, white background. They're looking for this weird melange of, grays and whites and blacks. We talked about the scene text detection. One option is to say, let's just run it through scene text detection, let that do detection and recognition, see what it spits out. We also said, well, those are separate tasks, detection and recognition. What if we use the detection step to create our segmentation, and then once we have our segmented pieces, feed those through a sequential recognizer to do that second portion, that second step. And we took a moment to say, well, one of the places where this struggles the most with recognizing, or let's say recalling, finding letters is the ends of lines. Right? The ends of lines, you often on a broken inscription have partial letters. On a squeeze, you'll have this weird folding of the paper that represents the edge. So it will want often to ignore those edge cases, but if you ignore them, you can't guess them right. So that's going to drive down your accuracy. You would rather that it take a stab and get it wrong, because this is a classic you miss 100% of the shots you don't take situation, right? If you don't even try to get it right, you're not going to get it right. If you try and it's hard and you get it wrong, you're no worse off. Okay, so spoiler, what are our conclusions? The first one was Kraken out of the box does not work. This pre-processing and trying to turn it into regular ink, pseudo ink, it was not an effective approach. So it's really important to retrain sort of whatever you're doing based on the images that we have. Second, as I just said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Finding the letters is super important, it turns out, to recognizing what they are. Right? So the best methods tend to be distinguished by having better recall prior to when you're recognizing them. And the most effective ended up being these hybrids where you use scene text to detect, and then you use sequential approaches to recognize the images themselves, right? So these are our detection rates, the recall. So this is not accuracy. This is how often we're even finding the letters. And you can see that Kraken, for example, struggled mightily to find the letters at all. Whereas once we started moving into the CNNs and the scene text detections, they were much, much more successful at least finding the letters in the first place. And then our error rates on detected characters. So this leaves out the ones that you don't take, as it were, right? This is just how did you do on the ones you could find? And error rates, you want low error rate, right? You want less errors. So the lower tends to be better. And the best performing were generally these, DBNet or YOLO, where it was hybrid with a sequential approach. And this shows you both that yellow graph that you just saw of how we do on the things we find, and also the red is how we do overall. So that is to say, if you include all the misses on shots you didn't take, what does your error rate look like? And so you can see that here you start to get some interesting variation where clearly some of these are missing more often. Even if they do better when they find things, they are missing enough that they're not keeping up when you look at the full picture. The results vary by squeeze. If you've ever looked at inscriptions, this is going to be a little bit self-evident because some inscriptions, you can't see a single letter on them, and some are beautiful and brilliant and you don't worry about it at all. So here on the left, there's one that's got a very low error rating. The letters are all large, evenly spaced, very clean. On the right, you have tiny cramped letters that are not evenly spaced at all, much higher error rate. So finish up by talking about a few future directions that we've got. One, training data is important. Increasing that would be good. Few possibilities here. Computer-assisted annotation. When we get our models good enough, no longer have to have our students go from scratch on things. They can correct, annotations that have been created by the computer model. Two, creating a web platform so that people who are teaching courses on epigraphy or things like that could use this as an opportunity to train their students in picking out letters, transcribing texts, and at the same time create additional ground truth for something like this. And also, we have our squeeze collection. We're the biggest in North America. We are probably 1/10 of the size of the collections that Inscriptiones Graecae and the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum have. They're in the works of digitizing their stuff, or at least thinking about it. When they do, that'll be huge. Integrating 3D data would be great. These are 3D objects, but we are approaching them from a 2D standpoint. There's not been a ton of work on doing letter detection on actual 3D data, so that's an exciting kind of frontier to potentially work with. Clustering, recognition by scribe, so not just saying what letter this is, but this matches with a certain handwriting, as it were, or with a certain date range. And finally, we are at the moment, Nicholas and I, in the middle of an ICDAR competition. So ICDAR is the International Conference on Document Analysis and Recognition. And we've been accepted and are running a competition for exactly this. We released a set of our squeeze images to be trained on. And we have a test set already. I should say at this point, it's a little late in the day. We're releasing the kind of confirming testing set on March 27th, and that's sort of your deadline for having finished up a model. But if anybody in here is interested in, taking a swing at this over the next 2 weeks, we are still welcoming new participants and would love to have your involvement. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, our final speaker for this session, we have Francesca Giannetti, the Digital Humanities Librarian at Rutgers, New Brunswick. She's published articles in the Journal of the Association for Information Science and Technology, Music Reference Services Quarterly, Notes, and College and Undergraduate Libraries. Her paper today is titled Reading the Sky on AI and Antiquity, an exploratory analysis of blue sky posts.
Thank you very much for the introduction. All right, let's see here. I thought I would, just spend a little bit of time setting the stage for this, slight change in topic. So I decided to call my paper Reading the Sky, in part because it is a sort of pun on the name of a social media platform, Bluesky, as well as an attempt at sense making of this AI saturated moment. And in a moment of hubris, I did intend the analogy to cosmology, but in reality, I'm looking at a very small constellation of social media users. And my subject is mostly classicists on this platform, although in some cases I surface more general perceptions or appropriations of classical imagery and culture. I'm going to pull this up so I'm not looking down. All right. So I really wanted to start us off with a quote. And I'm not a classicist, so you could just imagine me like frantically thumbing through, works, wasting an entire afternoon. Anyway, so I finally settled on this quote from Lucretius. because I thought it was kind of apt for the whole conference, actually. So I'll read. For in fact, it is not possible that the mind and understanding can be thought able to reside in any and every body. Just as in the upper air, there can be no tree, no clouds in the salt sea. As fish cannot live on the fields, blood cannot be in wood, nor sap in stones. It is fixed and ordained where each thing can grow and abide. So the mind cannot arise alone and apart without a body, nor can it be far distant from sinews and blood. So just a few of my thoughts on this particular citation. So I just wanted to, I guess, reinscribe intelligence as something human, but compound and embodied, and just point out that whatever intelligence that we ascribe to machines is human in origin. And in its ends, just because generative AI in particular has been trained on human knowledge in all of its contradictions. It has been corrected by actual human workers to make sure it doesn't say crazy things. And it reformulates its learning and its instructions into responses to human queries. Whoopsie. All right, so about me. I am a digital humanities librarian. I am not a classicist by training. I am actually an MLIS, card-carrying librarian. And so my point of view is that of an outsider looking in. And so for that reason, I invite your observations and if needed corrections. It would be great if we could all sort of collectively make sense of what I'm going to show you. And so moving on about the talk. So this is going to be an analysis of 8,000 posts from Bluesky that were collected from November 2017 to March of 2026. I did my last data pool on Wednesday of this week. And so, yes, for any astute users of social media platforms, my start date actually predates the launch of Bluesky. And I believe that the older posts are due to the fact that when people, abandoned Twitter, they made use of tools to basically migrate their entire Twitter archives over to Bluesky. And so that's why we're seeing these posts from like 2017. I do want to point out that the 8,000 posts is kind of nothing. It's a drop in the bucket compared to most social media analyses where you'll be looking at like hundreds of thousands of posts or even millions of posts. And I can't tell you, for example, like how many classicists are on Bluesky. If we were to do like an informal poll, like right now, like would you raise your hand if you are on Bluesky? And yeah, so for anybody online, that was 3 hands. So this is not a big population. You're kind of proving my point, which is to say that I can't really claim any statistical significance to what I'm going to share with you right now. So my observations should be taken as provisional and subject to further data collection and analysis. So a little bit about Bluesky. It has currently 5.2 million active users, and that's active within the last 30 days. That pretty much makes it smaller than everything except Truth Social. So bear that in mind. It was launched in 2019 as a research initiative within Twitter. And then it became independent in 2021. It was an invitation-only service in February 2023, and then it opened to public registrations in February 2024. So it's still fairly new. It has a, let me go back. It has a similar interface to an interaction model as Twitter. It's basically a Twitter clone, but it differs in that it uses this thing called Authenticated Transfer, AT protocol. And ATP is a decentralized open architecture that enables greater transparency and user control. And then, what I showed earlier, basically waves of academics and other users migrated to Bluesky following changes introduced by Elon Musk to Twitter, which is now called X. It is the so-called liberal echo chamber that Fox News has called it, and other, media outlets. And there is, I actually have read some, empirical evidence that indicates that it does indeed have like a left-leaning political bias. And it does have very generous and free API access, which means that it's becoming, Bluesky is essentially filling a niche that was once satisfied by Twitter for computational social science. So even if, Bluesky users are only a fraction of, Facebook or YouTube users or whatever, just because they let you in, they let you have access to their data, it's becoming a bit of a darling of the social science, computational social science community. So anyway, so I used the search posts endpoint in order to create 3 different collections of posts using the following key terms. And so on the left, you see the labels that I'm giving to each of these data sets: AI and antiquity, digital classics, and then ancient blue sky. So the first one, and then I'm also showing you the search terms that I use to retrieve posts. And I will say that the API doesn't tolerate very elaborate Boolean searching. So I'm expressing my search as a Boolean string, but in point of fact, I had to make a API call for antiquity AI, and then antiquity artificial intelligence, and then antiquity LLM, and so on and so forth, because it didn't like the or operator, but it does assume the and. And then digital classics, I used just the string digital classics. And then I eventually noticed that a lot of users in the UK and Europe are using digiclass. So I added that one. And then ancient blue sky is mainly just straight up classicists and classics, fans. So there's no like digital or AI inflection there. So it's mainly just fans of classical studies and classical culture. And so some descriptive statistics. So ancient blue sky, you can see, where's the cursor? There we go. Ancient blue sky, you can see, is by far the biggest data set. So lots and lots of posts here. It is functioning more as a broadcast group, which is to say that there are like 2 or 3 power users who are basically blasting out a bunch of posts. They're associated with aggregators, actual web aggregators that will push out, news stories, stories about classics that are appearing in newspapers like The Guardian and the BBC and so on and so forth, as well as blog posts. And then digital classics and AI antiquity, you can see that they're much smaller communities. But with that said, they have a much more conversational character with higher percentages of replies as a percentage of the total posts. So digital classics, for example, is like 19% replies, and then AI antiquity is 30% replies, compared to ancient blue sky, which was only 8% replies. And you can also see the broadcast nature of ancient blue sky when dividing the total number of posts by the authors. Sorry, so accounts basically stands for authors here. So when you divide total posts by accounts, you can see, for example, that ancient blue sky, you're seeing an average about 17 posts per author. And when you keep in mind that there are only like 3 power users, that's a lot of posts. And then digital classics had roughly like 7.4 posts per author. And AI antiquity was actually the most diverse collection in that there's only 1.6 posts per author. Then this is engagement by group. So I'm just looking at likes or average likes here per community. So we've got the ancient blue sky community in blue here, which generates by far the most likes. And then AI antiquities in red, and then digital classics is in green. Digital classics and AI antiquity, they start to approach parity with likes of so-called quote posts. And so high engagement with quote posts could also indicate enjoyment of dunking, formerly known as hate retweets for you Twitter refugees. And so what a hate retweet would be like something that you just fundamentally disagree with, so much so that you repost it and then add your 2 cents to why this is wrong or stupid or incorrect or what have you. So it's just to say that liking a quote post isn't necessarily positive, but it does show engagement. So I just thought I would give you a little bit of a view of what some people were liking. So, and again, the most liked posts were all from that ancient blue sky group. So I'll just read. This weird and wonderful Greek amphoriscos flask depicts a birdman, but the explanation is astonishing. It almost certainly relates to Aristophanes' famous comedy, The Birds, first produced in 415, 414 BCE, and may represent a costume worn by members of the chorus. And so there you have it, the image associated with the post. And just to note that I've anonymized all of the posts, so I'm not going to show you who posted this, just quoting the text, but these are all public posts. So you could easily, figure it out and find it on your own. But since I didn't ask any of these people if they wanted to participate in my study, I just decided to remove names as a ethical practice. This is the second most liked post, the face of the beautiful ancient Greek bronze Delphi charioteer, 5th century BCE, Archaeological Museum of Delphi, Greece. Check out those eyelashes. So we can see this is a very pretty boy. And that one had 822 likes. And so I think what we can see from these images is that, just people are using blue sky to, share enjoyment of beautiful and strange cultural objects. And obviously there are a lot of like-minded people who are liking these posts and sharing them. And this kind of reflects something that Simon Tanner has called educational value. So Simon Tanner has done a lot of research on cultural heritage, specifically digitized cultural heritage objects. And so he is looking at this from the lens of cultural heritage institutions like libraries and museums who are attempting to demonstrate the value of digitizing their collections. And so he has done this work on values, basically to show basically what values are users enacting when they engage with digitized cultural heritage. And for me, I think that the activity that I've seen in this ancient blue sky group really embodies this educational value, which is to say people are aware that digital resources contribute to their own or to other people's sense of culture, education, knowledge, and heritage, and therefore value it. So this is itty bitty for you guys. So there are just a lot of hashtags in this corpus. And it's very funny. Yesterday, Erin made me aware that some of these might represent conference activity. Just because, Erin, you're talking about how you did something for Epigraphic Friday. And I was like, what? What's Epigraphic Friday? Because, again, I don't know. So when I first saw this, I thought maybe these are like social media campaigns, just because there's literally one for every day of the week. So get this, there's Mosaic Monday, there's Epigraphy Tuesday, there's Relief Wednesday, Roman Fort Thursday, Fresco Friday, Roman Site Saturday, and Ancient Site Sunday. So we've all got our marching orders now. You know what you're supposed to do, no matter what day of the week it is. And I just wanted to emphasize that when I did look at individual posts, a lot of the posters they're located in the UK or in France, and they're talking about local sites like actual Roman ruins, in the UK or France or that sort of thing. So it's kind of a way of inviting people to become aware of the history in their own. Oh my goodness, 5 minutes, really? Oh wow, that went fast. The culture in their own backyards. All right, let's scoot along. So this is, I'm actually going to skip this one. I'm sorry. Top domains. So here again, this is tiny, I apologize, but it gives you another view into what people are sharing. So we see a lot of blogs, newspaper sources. The Guardian here is here. You see WordPress sites, aggregators, the Historian's Hut, Heritage Daily, so on and so forth. You see also a lot of people sharing their own publications, these, academics sharing journal articles, book titles, grants, calls for proposals, including my own, actually. You see, for example, YouTube, and this is probably something that wouldn't surprise any of you here, but it caught my attention. So there's an account that's called Potted History, and it's a potter who's also a classicist who attempts to replicate the tools and materials and methods of antiquity, and like shares these YouTube videos of him making pots. I thought that was amazing. And then you also see Twitch TV here, which is about mythology-inflected games, often played and live described by classicists. So I saw like Hades 2 and Pathless and stuff like that. So anyway, just to give you an idea of what people are talking about. Is there community overlap here? Not a whole lot. So you can see, again, Ancient Blue Sky is huge. It dwarfs the others. And this is a plot that shows you there are attempts to find overlap. And you can see that there are only 40 posts that participate in both the digital classics and AI antiquity communities, only 18 posts that cross all three communities, and just 7 posts that cross digital classics and Ancient Blue Sky. So for whatever reason, these are distinct, fairly distinct communities. I wanted to include some time series analysis just so that you could see what these things look like over time. You can see, for example, AI antiquity is in red. It mainly picks up in late 2024 and to the present. Ancient Blue Sky is just a smudge, a lot of posts. And then digital classics, you see it has a lot of older activity actually, but it starts to pick up steam again towards the end, right around the same time as the others, which is kind of interesting. When I saw this at first, I was wondering if the explosion of interest in AI has in some sense reinvigorated digital classics, which is the older community, as we heard yesterday. So digital classics has been around since the 70s, 80s, depends on how you want to, where you want to date it. And the interest in AI is also quite old, but when you think about, I guess, the recent interest, it's more generated by, the launch of ChatGPT, for example. And so I can't necessarily say, oh, here's another view of the same data, basically. So you can see that I created these annotation lines for when ChatGPT launches, when Blue Sky was invite only, when Blue Sky is open to the public. And so I can't really say for sure if it's just Blue Sky acquiring more users or if it is some kind of a reaction to AI. I'm going to scoot along. So this is TF-IDF. We saw this used in different presentations earlier today. So this is the slide where I'm going to out Patrick as a major contributor to the digital classics community. So we can see, for example, his library, Latin C. I don't know how you're pronouncing that. Anyway, so Latin C is an adaptation of Spacey, which is a Python library to do named entity tagging of texts, in this case, text in Latin. Yep, I see that. What I want to point out here is that Patrick is not using AI to describe his work, at least not on Blue Sky. He's tagged it NLProc for, natural language processing. And so I thought that was also kind of interesting. So it made me wonder if it signaled a certain reluctance for using the term AI, at least to describe one's work. And if maybe AI has become too general or maybe just too closely associated with generative AI, which is what we were talking about earlier, and that the narrower term is favored just because it's more precise, but it also kind of escapes some of the baggage that we associate with the term AI in the academic community. I'm going to scoot ahead to sentiment analysis. And because, of course, I had to do sentiment analysis. This time, I'm only looking at the AI and antiquity data set. There's a pretty wide distribution of scores. So here I'm using the AFIN dictionary, which it basically will give a score of like between -5 for negative and 5 positive to each word, with 0 being neutral. So that's why I've got a line for 0 across here. And so we can see that there's a pretty huge distribution of scores. The discourse is trending negative, but it seems to be going in a more positive direction. And then when you drill down to look at the individual words that are contributing to this sentiment analysis, you can see, for example, let's see, what did I want to point out here? Yeah, so, a lot of words like happy, wonderful, excited, those are actually coming from announcements of new jobs or attendance at professional meetings. And then you have to be mindful that some of the words in the negative column, including some obscenities, pardon me, but that's what you get with social media data. Anyway, some of the negative words, you kind of have to be mindful that they're not actually negative in a classics context. So things that are lost or destroyed or died, you know, most classicists are probably fairly neutral about the topic of the people they study being dead. So, so you have to keep in mind that the score actually might be more positive. The overall score of the data set might be more positive in its, you know, character than I initially thought. So I'm going to stop here just because I'm at time, but I do have some of these individual posts that contributed to the negative, as well as some of the false negatives, you know, describing, you know, Pompeii that was. And just my conclusions are what I alluded to earlier. So I will just stop here and take any questions that you might have. Thank you.